welcome to the PTSD Nation Global Podcast Series. I'm your host, Manny Waks, and with me today is Yaron Edel, who's the founder and CEO of an Israel-based organization called Helem Club. Uh, welcome, Yaron, and thank you so much for joining me. Um,
Thank you for having me.
we're going to get straight into it, and the first important question is, interested in your journey. How did you end up coming to deal with the issue of PTSD? And I know this isn't the first organization that you were involved in founding. Interested in your personal journey around PTSD.
Basically, I grew up in Jerusalem to two immigrant parents. So, growing up in the 90s in Jerusalem, it was turbulent, you can call it. So this is one part of the experience, and living in Armon HaNatziv, which is a very particular neighborhood in Jerusalem with some violent background. So, this was part of my childhood as well. And then going in the Israeli army for almost 5 years, two of which was extra than the normally drafted during the first Intifada, and ended my army service after the Second Lebanon War in 2006. And one of those words has a lot of
Absolutely.
sub stories and stuff. So this is basically it.
Ultimately, you came to establish Helm Club. Maybe say a few words about what the organization does.
Yeah, sure. So Helem Club is a movement of people with PTSD for people with PTSD. And what we do is build our own solutions to any problems we have in the rehabilitation process. Our approach is digital first. So we try and build part of the rehabilitation journey which are missing. It can be emotional, it can be practical. So we build different types of interventions. Just to give an example, our first projects 6 months ago was what we call the first aid kit for the person who has PTSD but is in denial. So it's a 44-minute video content that help a person going through an emotional journey that helps him realize that maybe he has some problem and he should go and treat it.
Amazing. Of course, I'm familiar with some of the work you guys have done, and really all the credit to you. The 7th of October was a monumental day here in Israel, the Hamas attacks. How did that day, the events of that day, affect you personally? And have your feelings and perspectives evolved since then, and in what way?
It is a very important date from now on in the Israeli calendar for sure, and Jewish people's calendar for sure. And on my personal level, I found myself, the massacre started around 6:30 in the morning. At around 11, I already found myself in phone calls with people who got panic attacks going to the army. And I found the next 2 weeks doing only those phone calls, tens of people a day for me, and then a group of volunteers that we started giving like first aid response. We told them, okay, no problem. You call this line, you go Natal, which is like the prominent Israeli organization for treatment. Or you call the army at that number and you say this and that to the commander. So we just gave like a easy way. Each phone call, I made it better and made it better. At the end of the first day, I wrote a one pager to see what the flow of the conversation can be. That way, it was really like a response type of approach. It's just because I've been active in Israel in the realm of PTSD for a long time. People were looking and easily finding me, and approaching me was easy for them. So I guess this is how they end up seeking help. To take like a bigger perspective, like before the 7th of October, we were a volunteer based organization. It means that we operate only by the goodwill of our volunteers. Someone has the time, then a project will be done. If no one has time, then no project will be done. We've been trying to fundraise seriously for a year until 7th of October. And those two first weeks of phone call, I understood that something fundamentally changed in Israeli culture. And the thing that changed is if we thought that people are not aware of PTSD, then now we can safely say that people are over aware of PTSD.
Wow.
Okay, so we are at the other end of the spectrum. And that's an amazing achievement for all the PTSD organization who'll be working for the last 20 years to make this a reality. We got it. And that means that the whole field of fundraising has also changed. 7, 8, 9, and 10th of October, people were living as if they had PTSD in Israel. Think of all the donors, they felt such strong emotions,
Wow.
such panic attacks and fear, and they got it.
That
I'm serious. This is the experience people endured. They had PTSD for 3 days, for 4 days. Uh,
amazing. This is perfect segue to my next question, which is in many ways, Israel has almost been founded on trauma. Obviously, you had Holocaust survivors, you had wars from the day Israel was established, and many terrorist attacks, etc. And now there is this new collective trauma, mainly in Israel, of course, but not only, because Jewish communities around the world and others who have been impacted, even we can say Palestinian civilians and family members around across the world. So, would it be accurate to say that this entire nation is basically suffering from either trauma or PTSD? And how would you differentiate those two elements? And a follow up question: is there a particular group within Israel that is more susceptible to PTSD?
I will do the first differentiation between PTSD as a medical term and PTSD as a cultural term, because though it's a big differentiation. If we talk medically, let's pass out questionnaires, let's bring psychiatrists, let's do an evaluation, and you'll have the answer if it's 20%, if it's 50%, or if it's 3%. So this is like a very straightforward question. And then to answer it, then no, medically speaking, Israeli is not a PTSD country. It is maybe one of the highest PTSD rate in Western countries. This is yes. In Israel, Professor Menachem Ben Ezra from the University of concluded a study with an international study group, and in their study they asked the question, the percentage of people dealing with PTSD in Israeli society, and the results were that 9% have PTSD and another 2.6% have complex PTSD, in total 11.6%. About 3 times more than the world average. In the same year, the World Health Organization did like a questionnaire, and their results were 3.9% of the world's population. So in Israel, we have like almost 3 times the amount of PTSD than the average. So just to give perspective. Okay, so if we're talking clear only from a medical term, then the answer is no. The 7th of October probably would make the number more close to 15%, maybe 20%. Okay, but
Yep, that's the medical element, okay, culturally.
the cultural one, that's an easy yes. And I'll say why it's an easy yes. The founding argument of the state of Israel in 1948, the founding argument, the most important argument is we just have been through a Holocaust. We need to protect ourselves by ourselves. This is why we need a country. That's the first argument, not the second,
Yep.
the first. Afterwards is the Jewish people, we need that and that. Okay. But the first one is this is what happened because we couldn't protect ourselves. This is the first argument. And this is a classic PTSD argument. Like a person with PTSD will say exactly this,
Yeah.
nothing else. Now I protect myself, no more of this thing.
Yep. Yeah. Interesting.
So this is like classical PTSD argument. Now let me double up on this. You read all the Jewish holidays. It's all about PTSD. We need to remember what happened when you were in Egypt, when they tried to kill us. It's a PTSD oriented culture. When you look at modern Judaism or maybe modern Israel, what's happening here in modern Israel, the culture is a PTSD culture. You have multiple ways to show it. How people talk about the political system, very militaristic language. You see the place of generals, right? Like people want people to protect them. In the US, they say the election is about the economy. So in Israel, it's about bitachon, it's
Sure.
about defense, security. So generals are important. That's a PTSD culture. Medically, I would say hell no. Culturally, I would say hell yes.
And interesting, I mean, that you didn't really distinguish between trauma and PTSD itself, because not necessarily does trauma always lead to PTSD. There are ways to address it. Um, are there specific groups that are more susceptible than others to end up with PTSD?
Yeah, of course. Communities who are more secluded, who don't have a code of emotional conversations, which have a strong male dominated culture,
Macho.
which is religious. All of those things make those communities much more susceptible on the one hand, but also it make them resilient on the other hand. When you feel a strong sense of belonging, it's a good shield against trauma because you feel like you're protected as part of a group. So it can play on both hands. But once you have PTSD and you are part of one of those communities, you have a very hard time to treat yourself because it means you need to break social norms in order to feel better. So basically, the more marginalized your community is, uh, the more hard it will be for you to feel better.
I'm interested in your views and experiences in the context of the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, the military. Have you noticed over the years the difference in terms of the approach of the IDF in dealing with the issue of PTSD? Do they offer things that they didn't offer before? Is it got to do? Has it got to do with 7th of October? Has it got to do with organisations and individuals like yourself who are leading the charge and sharing some of the information around it?
That's a great question because I think like the IDF as an army has done quantum leap this war, very progressive minded in terms of how to deal with PTSD. I'll give you some examples. I finished my army in 2006, Second Lebanon War. We finished the war. We did all the conversation to see what was wrong, what we could better from an operational point of view.
Yeah.
Then they gave me a high five and thank you for your service, not even that, and that's it. That's how we process trauma. Okay. And then we needed to figure out ourselves what to do now. And now what they're doing, let's take an example of a reserve soldier, which is different from like a full service soldier. A reserve soldier come from the war and come back to civilian life quickly. So what they did is that gave them an extra 7 days after they ended paid leave. That's like a first intervention they did. It sounds like a small thing, but I'm saying it's amazing they did this. And the second thing they did, each unit has an emotional debriefing, like 2, 3 weeks after they finished. They come back for 2 or 3 days for emotional debriefing, and it's amazing. And you have a psychologist who are now paired to a specific unit, to a specific even company, which is smaller than a unit. That's also like a big leap in what was before, in which probably you had a paired psychologist, but you didn't know him and you didn't have any relationship with him. Now, from the beginning, before they entered battle, before they started their operational duty, they met a psychological officer and did prepare, and it's the same person who, got them when they came back. So the army did really groundbreaking work. Will be interesting to see how it will affect trauma, even though the numbers here will be very, I don't know if high is the right description, because the atrocities were in such a high degree and for such a long time. It's hard to, we are in an uncharted territory in terms of trauma, but the army did amazing work. They have a lot to make better.
You can see a lot of information around that the military is sharing that, and the news agencies are also informing the public around that. So that's really interesting. I guess obviously there's a lot of stigma attached to PTSD, and of course we touched on the fact that now it's changing. You started off by saying to the other extent in some ways. What are some of the biggest challenges that individuals face in terms of seeking help?
So let's take a specific case, okay? Because it's hard to generalize. Let's say you live in a middle city in Israel, a middle in terms of size, Tachtigva, for example. Okay, you are from a poorer neighborhood. Okay, so you had violence in your childhood. Your culture is a violent culture in terms that violence is part of you day to day when you grow up. So you're part of a violent culture. And then you go to a combat unit, you fight in a war, you get discharged, and then for 10 years, your behavior is appalling, but people refer to you as he's just a grumpy guy or something of that sort. So him, he has like a lot of barriers to overcome. The first barrier will be to even admitting he has a problem because he grown up in a culture in which you need to be strong and you need to solve your emotional problems by yourself. You don't tell anyone about your emotional problems, and you just figure it out. And you probably have two kids already and a wife, and you don't have a good relationship with her because you don't have a good relationship with yourself.
Yep.
Uh, uh, so everything is fucked up in your life, and sorry for it, but it's the proper word to describe the situation. And this guy will need like a very strong emotional meeting with a very high emotional intelligence, person with high emotional intelligence, in order for him to have even a chance of changing the path he's on. So for him, it will be a lot of luck. Let's say you take out the poor background and the violent culture, and you only have a violent house, a violent family, which is different. Then the problems that you will face is to understand what is your trauma. Is it your violent family or is it the army? What affected what? It's not the reason I'm going to therapy, for example. So that will be a very problematic situation emotionally at first. I'm sure in terms of shame, you don't even touch the military stuff because it's all connected to your childhood and you put everything in the back of your mind and you forget it. So the problem there is like a complex one. And those are common situations. I mean, if you come from a Haredic background, like a Hasidic background, and you're not in contact with your parents because you went to the army, you have a total different set of problems.
In terms of tools and strategies, have you found something that you can recommend that's specifically helpful, especially in the context of military and violence, something that can help a PTSD sufferer?
Fun. Fun for me is one of the most important coping strategies. It can be a video game, it can be tennis. I started playing tennis not long ago. It's all games and be stupid. That's the kind of be a kid. It can be really everything, can be drawing. Do something that is fun to you because fun, chemically speaking, is healthy for you, okay? Because it bring out like those good hormones that you want. Okay, so you need those like in kilos if you can. Have fun for me is one of the most important bricks of the rehabilitation foundations.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, as I also experience both PTSD, but also try to focus on the fun. And the fun doesn't necessarily have to mean just laughing and smiling. It could be physical activity, something that you enjoy and gets you active and does positive things that there are complete opposite. You can have fun in other ways that are not necessarily healthy and have longer term consequences as well. So there needs to be that aspect as
Yes, sometimes you need like short-term interventions, like those more problematic types of fun. That's sometimes healthy for you actually, but that's a different conversation.
Absolutely. I'm sure you've encountered countless stories, both positives and negatives. I'm interested, have you got one story that stayed with you, an inspiring story where a soldier has shared their experience and it stayed with you? Have you got something up your sleeve by any chance?
Reading those messages that we get in our inboxes, like in Instagram and Facebook at most, are messages of people who are just figuring out what's happening with them. So you can see in the message like a person sharing, oh my God, if you are in my head, it's my voice talking. How did you do it? I don't understand. And then you continue. A lot of time they just write a lot of messages and we don't have time to respond. So just get a thread. And like the evolution of his process. So first of all, he's mind blown that he have words for what he is going through.
For our listeners who may not necessarily be aware, fully understand PTSD, what key aspects should they be aware of? Is there something that you can guide them to?
There is a specific way of talking about PTSD that resonates easily with people, that makes them understand the problem to the fullest very quickly. And basically, it's an injury to the part of the brain that is responsible for the danger mechanism. The danger mechanism that is triggered automatically without our choosing by the brain when we are in front of danger. And danger can be everything, not only terrorists and soldiers, everything. And this is a mechanism that keeps you alive. That's his job. Once you've been through a lot of those mechanism triggered, then the mechanism got broken. And then you start to see dangers where there is no danger. And this is basically PTSD. We see danger where there is no danger, and all our defense mechanism, our danger mechanism got triggered and triggered even though there is no danger. So you see us angry, you see us in avoidance because it's a response to danger.
That's brilliantly explained. Amazing. One final question, and we touched on this earlier. Are there any specific coping strategies or resources you'd recommend for our listeners? Of course,
Yeah.
you mentioned fun, but aside from that,
Find a follow a survivor. Find somebody who've been through a similar experience of yours and build a relationship. Like my partner Amnon, we are our survival mechanism together. Okay, so he call me when he has some problem, and I call him. We do not call because we do not make phone calls. We connect when one of us has some challenge, and I found that this kind of relationship is a life-saving relationship.
thank you so much, Yaron Edel, for sharing your personal experiences and challenges and insights with us. Your work and the work of Helem Club and your previous work before Helem Club have been amazing, and certainly you've contributed a great deal to this issue. Thank you, Yaron, for that. And to our listeners, I would say to remember you're not alone. There are resources available. There are ways to address these issues. There are stigmas, but there are counter options to deal with those things. So hopefully our listeners will listen to us, follow us with the next episode as well. Until next time, thank you and shalom from Israel.